Resident Evil 4 is the kind of game that sticks in your memory. Over-the-shoulder camera, constant tension, and every confrontation feeling like a fight for survival. So, if you've finished the remake, replayed the original 1,000 times, and still miss that mix of action and horror, stick with me. Because in today's video, I've separated 10 new games that take that RE4 essence and take it to other worlds, other stories. But with the same adrenaline as always. If you love Resident Evil 4, you simply need to know these titles. If you're one of those who became obsessed with Resident Evil 4 and still miss a survival horror with that balance between tension, combat, and atmosphere, Contaminant is one of those games that simply cannot be missing from your list of recent discoveries. You know when you enter a world that seems familiar, but every corner hides something disturbing, with that feeling of distorted reality? That's exactly the prevailing atmosphere in Contaminant, an indie title of pure psychological horror, developed by people passionate about the genre, and that shines through in every detail of the game. It's impossible not to notice, right from the start, the references to the Resident Evil series, camera positioned in third person, old-fashioned item management, and that rhythm in which every open door can bring relief or tragedy. The setting here, however, has a totally different flavor. An alternative post-Soviet reality with abandoned factories that border on surrealism, and grotesque creatures that defy even those who are hardened in retro horror. This backdrop doesn't just serve for cheap scares, but creates an oppressive environment full of personality. That feeling of constant danger mixed with insatiable curiosity. What I liked most about Contaminant was its ambiguous narrative, evoking not only the discomfort of RE4's body horror, but also modern touches inspired by post-horror films like Get Out and Us. The protagonist, Charlotte, is thrown into an industrial nightmare, needing to solve enigmas that defy logic and even natural law, and, of course, face monsters that seem to have emerged from a delirium arising from experiments with other realities. For those who like the tension cycle of Resident Evil 4, exploring, solving puzzles under pressure, and feeling that mix of fear and adrenaline in combat, Contaminant delivers with praise. The game balances punctual shootings, claustrophobic scenarios, and backtracking, with well-thought-out checkpoint mechanics that resemble the classic save rooms. The sound atmosphere contributes to the suspense, and the visual, even indie, is full of details that make the world seem alive and threatening. But don't expect a chewed game here. Contaminant trusts that you like to waste time exploring and solving really challenging enigmas. It has that charm of the most authorial indie experiences, with bold design choices and a narrative approach much more abstract than most AAA. For those who miss that feeling of, I'm lost but I want to continue, it's a feast. If Resident Evil 4 was a watershed and still occupies a special place in your memory, giving Contaminant a chance is almost mandatory. The game takes the best ingredients of survival horror, seasons it with its own identity, full of surrealism, dense atmosphere, and memorable monsters, and delivers an adventure that, despite its technical limitations, conquers by the climate and creative courage. If you are a fan of the Resident Evil series, especially the most terrifying and intense moments, Resident Evil Requiem will be a mandatory experience for you. The game, which arrives in February 2026, brings a terrifying vibe that combines the best of survival horror with a suffocating atmosphere full of tension, which is very reminiscent of the climate of Resident Evil 7, but with an even more modern and visceral touch. The fact that you can switch between first and third person at any time is a genius idea. This gives that freshness to the gameplay, allowing you to choose how you want to feel the terror at that moment, whether for total immersion or for faster and more strategic action. The protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, an FBI agent, brings a new perspective to the series. She is on a mission to unravel a series of mysterious deaths in a dark hotel, but soon realizes that she is being hunted by a terrifying monster, with frightening intelligence that goes beyond the typical stalker of previous games. The constant feeling of being watched, followed, and blocked makes each corridor turn into a minefield of pure adrenaline. The moments of tension in hiding places, with the right to squat and stealth, are proof of how the game mixes action and fear in a way very faithful to the Resident Evil spirit. Another point that caught my attention was the visual impact of Requiem. Capcom used its powerful RE engine to deliver impressive graphics, with path trace lighting that creates ultra-realistic shadows and reflections, making every dark corner seem even more threatening. Details such as the sweat on Grace's skin or the tears in the monster's rags give a level of immersion much greater than we are used to, taking horror to an almost cinematographic level. In the gameplay aspect, the demo that many have already experienced brought only 3 rooms to explore, but even so, it was enough to prove how tension is skillfully built. You have access to simple items such as bottles for distraction, as well as a lighter to illuminate, which at the same time helps and reveals your position to the enemy. The monster's artificial intelligence is quite advanced, managing to track even when you think you are safe behind objects or under the ceiling, which forces the player to think fast and make decisions at the right time to survive. For those who, like me, love the suspense and narrative of Resident Evil Village, Requiem seems to bring back this mixture of rich lore and intense horror, but with a more refined mechanics and gameplay options that please both fans of pure terror and those who prefer a little more action. The narrative promises to be engaging and mysterious, with that classic touch of psychological terror that makes you doubt what is real at all times. If you want to feel that chill in your spine that only Resident Evil knows how to provide, Resident Evil Requiem is the title you need to have on your radar for 2026. It promises to mix the best of the series with technical innovation and a horror that doesn't leave you for a second, becoming an indispensable experience for those who follow the saga and seek a survival horror of weight.
The Umbrella Corporation eventually went bankrupt due to the mounting evidence brought to light. However, its legacy lives on. And as for the survivors, their story was just beginning.
Some, like Raccoon City journalist Alyssa Ashcroft, sought to expose Umbrella's darkest secrets. Some hunted the bioterrorists who weaponized Umbrella's research. Others set out to unveil the real truth behind the government's sterilization operation. The aftershocks of the Raccoon City incident would be felt for decades to come, and coincide with other increasingly frequent bioweapon-related outbreaks. Caught up in one such bioweapon-related tragedy was an ordinary man by the name of Ethan Winters. Ethan was searching for his missing wife, Mia. Following an anonymous email, he finds himself in the bowels of the bayou at the Baker estate, where he's greeted by a deranged family infected by a horrifying ailment. Ethan fought to escape their madness and rescue his wife. 3 years later, Ethan would face a new nightmare. This time, his baby daughter Rose is taken away by Chris Redfield, the legendary hero who survived countless bioterror incidents.
A.I.L.A is a first-person survival horror game that arrives with a unique proposition, putting you in the role of Samuel, a beta tester who interacts with a revolutionary artificial intelligence called A.I.L.A, capable of creating personalized horror scenarios based on your deepest fears. Set in the near future, in the year 2035, the game mixes science fiction and psychological horror, exploring the fine line between the real and the virtual, in an experience that promises to be as immersive as it is disturbing. What impressed me most about A.I.L.A is how it combines different styles of the survival horror genre into a single title. You will escape ritualistic cults, solve bloody enigmas, and face medieval undead, all with a narrative proposal that adapts according to your choices and fears. This variety keeps the experience always fresh and unpredictable, something rare even in established games of the genre. Visually, A.I.L.A is a spectacle. Developed with Unreal Engine 5 and using Lumen technology for global illumination, the game delivers photorealistic and dark environments, which help to create that oppressive atmosphere fundamental to a good survival horror. The soundtrack and sound design are not far behind, with subtle and terrifying sounds that amplify the immersion, especially if you use a headset. where every whisper and footstep makes your heart race. The game mechanics are accessible even with a lot of depth. Everything is done with simple commands on the keyboard and mouse, but the responsibility of managing resources, solving complex puzzles, and making quick decisions in the face of grotesque monsters keeps the tension high. The game does not skimp on heavy and shocking scenes. Prepare for moments of visceral body horror which can surprise even the bravest. Another interesting aspect is the meta-narrative, which revolves around Samuel's own role as a tester of games generated by AI. The feeling of being inside a horror game within the real game creates layers of suspense and paranoia that are very well crafted, leaving you questioning what is simulation and what is reality, without giving up that constant chill down your spine. A.I.L.A has everything to be a milestone of survival horror in 2025, especially for those who enjoy a more psychological and experimental vibe in the genre. The mix of advanced technology, unique narrative, and multifaceted horror makes it a mandatory experience for fans looking for something new, intense, and creative in the universe of horror games. A.I.L.A is a first-person survival horror game that has been causing quite a stir since its revelation in 2025. Developed by Team Clout, the title takes place in an abandoned research fortress where a mysterious source of evil has given rise to grotesque creatures called aberrations. The focus of the game is to create a highly immersive and terrifying atmosphere, using advanced physics, breathtaking graphic details, and a visceral dismemberment system that allows for dynamic and realistic mutilations. The game promises a visceral experience with a combination of melee horror, strategic shooting, and tense exploration. The game's physics, worked with Unreal Engine 5, makes every shot, blow, or cut bloodily detailed. Exposed organs, torn muscles, real-time deformations. The enemies, which include grotesque mutants, are designed to react unpredictably to different attacks, increasing the feeling of constant danger. One of the most impressive aspects of A.I.L.A is its focus on atmosphere. The binaurality of the audio and the sound design contribute to creating a sense of paranoia that is in the air all the time, along with dark and scary environments that seem alive, almost pulsating with hidden dangers. In addition, the world reacts to the player's actions, such as objects that move or environments that deteriorate, reinforcing the feeling that you are really being chased by something out of your control. The game's narrative is quite fragmented, explored through notes, audio recordings, videos, and environmental clues that create a sense of mystery and paranoia. The plot revolves around a character who enters the fortress to discover the truth behind a scientific experiment that went terribly wrong, and the story unfolds in a non-linear way, leaving many questions in the air. The gameplay combines elements of shooter, stealth, and investigation with a resource management system such as limited ammunition and weapons that can fail or wear out. The difficulty is calibrated to challenge even the most experienced players with intelligent enemies and highly interactive environments, which require strategy and creativity to survive. A.I.L.A seems to be one of the most promising bets of horror in 2026, bringing a formula that mixes psychological fear, extreme gore, and realistic physics in an experience that promises to be one of the most brutal, scary, and immersive of its recent genre. Nakwon Last Paradise is a third-person survival horror game that will catch the attention of those who loved Resident Evil 4, but with a much more intense and realistic approach. Set in a post-apocalyptic Seoul infested with zombies, the game stands out for mixing elements of survival, stealth, and life simulation in a world taken over by chaos. In Nakwon, you are not a superhero. You are an ordinary survivor trying to stay alive, where every step and sound can mean life or death, which is very reminiscent of that tense feeling of exploring villages and castles in RE4, always on the edge of danger. The game's differential lies in the extraction survival mechanic, where you need to infiltrate infested areas to collect valuable items and complete missions, all under the constant risk of losing everything in case of death. Weapons are scarce, so stealth is almost mandatory. Zombies react to sound and attack aggressively when they notice your presence, requiring you to use hiding places, distractions, and a good strategy to escape. This constant tension, combined with the real risk of losing your progress, creates an atmosphere as tense and engaging as the best phases of RE4. In addition to the danger of the undead, Nakwon adds the dynamics of the humans themselves, other survivors who can be both allies and enemies, in a PvP-VE system that resembles the most hardcore survival games. This adds an extra layer of unpredictability and strategy, as you never know if you will only encounter zombies or also face other players, or NPCs trying to survive in the dispute for scarce resources. This mix of combat, stealth, and diplomacy in such a hostile world brings a freshness to the zombie survival genre that RE4 fans will appreciate. Visually, Nakwon impresses with a detailed reproduction of Seoul in ruins, with dense and claustrophobic environments, narrow streets, abandoned buildings, and many hiding places that reinforce the immersion and the fear of being caught off guard. The graphic quality and sound effects help to create an audio-visual experience that increases fear and urgency, much like the sensations that Resident Evil 4 brought when exploring villages and dark places with constant threat around. It's not just a frenetic action game. Nakwon requires planning and patience. You need to manage your safe base, earning money by selling equipment and completing missions that help improve your degree as a citizen within the post-apocalyptic society. This brings a realistic sense of survival where every choice counts, and the time outside the safe zone is a race to collect resources without succumbing, something that can greatly please those who like the tension and deep setting of RE4, but want something new in terms of gameplay and context. In the end, for those who are fans of Resident Evil 4 and are looking for a survival horror that also mixes stealth, management, and moderate combat in an intense and urban setting, Nakwon Last Paradise is a title that deserves to be on your list. It is a brutal, challenging, and very close experience to the feeling of being trapped between the dead and the living, where every decision can be the last. If you like the vibe of tense exploration with dark survival stories, Nakwon is already making waves and promises to be one of the highlights of the genre in 2026. Nobody's Left is a third-person post-apocalyptic survival horror that immerses you in a city devastated by war, where survival requires more than just strength. It requires adaptation and decision. The game stands out for its emotional narrative and suffocating atmosphere, conveying the feeling that it is no longer possible to be an ordinary person in this hostile world, which is very reminiscent of the tense and immersive vibe of Resident Evil 4, especially for those who enjoy that exploration and combat against relentless enemies. In Nobody's Left, the city is a minefield of both human enemies and unpredictable threats, and every action can be crucial to protect those you love. The gameplay favors care and strategy, where the intelligent use of the environment and stealth can be decisive to survive, bringing that constant tension characteristic of survival horror games that RE4 fans love. You are never sure what you will find, which keeps the thrill up all the time. Another thing that draws attention is the visual style of the game, which redesigns the urban apocalypse with great detail and a dark tone, creating an atmosphere full of mystery and danger. This setting is very reminiscent of the villages and rural areas of Resident Evil 4, but in a modern and war-torn setting, with many details that enhance the immersion and emotional impact of the experience. The heavy atmosphere and the feeling of isolation are constant. The story, which promises to be emotionally intense, puts you in control of an ordinary survivor, with a narrative of claw, change, and responsibility that goes beyond zombies, exploring human elements and conflicts of a post-war world. Just like in RE4, where the narrative and characters were essential to keep the player hooked on the adventure, Nobody's Left bets high on building an engaging plot that connects survival and emotion. In combat, the game offers a balanced challenge between action and caution, with enemies that require precision, resource management, and a lot of patience. The confrontations are tense, as making a mistake can mean death, which creates that adrenaline climax that is the trademark of great titles of the genre. This gives the feeling that each battle is worth it and holds the player both for the difficulty and for the strategy, a high point for those who love horror games with visceral action Resident Evil style. Finally, if you are a fan of Resident Evil 4 and are looking for a new title that captures the same essence of suspense, survival, and emotional narrative, Nobody's Left is a bet that you cannot miss. The game brings all this with a fresh look at the genre, mixing horror and action in a post-war scenario that keeps the tension at the limit and the experience always unpredictable. A new gem for lovers of horror games who want to feel in their skin the struggle for survival in a world that has collapsed.
All of this forest is watered by blood drops, so I'm trying to give it more of that.
The Midnight Walkers is a first-person PvPvE survival horror game that stands out for its tense atmosphere and extraction-style gameplay, where you have to fight to survive in a huge skyscraper called Liberty Grand Center. The game involves exploring floors full of zombies while facing other players in a brutal dispute to collect valuable loot and escape alive. This dynamic of entering, looting, and leaving brings a sense of constant risk, which should greatly please those who love that feeling of danger and controlled exploration from Resident Evil 4. The unique aspect of the Midnight Walkers is the verticality of the setting, with floors being sealed one by toxic gas, forcing players to move constantly and increasing the level of tension. The closed environment of the building, where every corner can hide a threat, is reminiscent of the claustrophobia present in areas like the villages of RE4, placing the player in situations of extreme care and attention to detail. The dark atmosphere is enhanced by strong sound effects such as the sound of echoing footsteps and approaching zombies, elevating the suspense to another level. The gameplay involves much more than just shooting zombies. You need to manage and build your hideout between incursions, crafting weapons, armor, and survival equipment, while negotiating loot with other players. This blend of survival, combat, and strategy brings an interesting depth that keeps the game fresh with each match, similar to the mix of action and tactics that Resident Evil 4 brought to the genre. In addition, the game mode can be played solo or in teams of up to 3, increasing the possibility of different styles and strategies. The Midnight Walkers is brutal and silent in the way it delivers terror, with zombies and human enemies always exerting pressure. The constant threat of sudden death and the total loss of equipment upon dying create that addictive feeling that every movement needs to be calculated to avoid losing everything. A central element much appreciated by fans of the tense and punitive survival style of RE4. Each escape you manage is a relief and a memorable victory, and it's easy to get immersed in this fight for survival. The game is quite detailed, showing a decaying building full of different themed areas such as hospitals, casinos, parking lots, and gyms, which keeps the exploration interesting and varied. The low lighting and fog effects give that typical touch of terror, while the design of the monsters and the pace of the confrontations create moments of tension and adrenaline worthy of the great games of the genre. This care in the setting helps to engage the player from the beginning to the end of the mission. For those who enjoy Resident Evil 4, The Midnight Walkers brings a new experience within the same spirit. Tension, survival, and action that depend as much on strategy as on reflexes. With its extractive gameplay, where you need to escape alive with the resources you have, conquered, and the hostile environment that pressures the player not to relax at any moment, it promises to be a sure recommendation for fans who want a survival horror with adrenaline and rewarding challenge in the right measure. Sangra is a Brazilian game that respectfully rescues the essence of classic survival horror from the 90s and 2000s, bringing an oppressive atmosphere and that tension that Resident Evil 4 fans know well. The game combines the exploration of decaying environments with challenging puzzles, limited inventory management, and a climate of constant threat, placing the player in a position of having to think before acting and always be prepared to flee or face danger. As in RE4, the level design in Sangra is designed to create moments of suspense and terror, with tight corridors, dark lighting, and enemies that not only attack but also create a sense of imminent danger. The feeling of precision in the gameplay, in the combat mechanics, and in the management of resources such as ammunition and healing items is absolutely fundamental, bringing that classic vibe that those who fell in love with Resident Evil 4 will certainly appreciate. One of the most interesting parts of the game is how it mixes modernity with retro charm. The graphics have a modern look, but with that classic touch in the artistic design and in the construction of the scenes, maintaining the identity of traditional survival horror. Puzzles are present and essential, requiring attention and reasoning from the player to advance, something that rescues the brilliance of the old horror adventures, especially for those who like the combination of action with mystery and puzzle solving. The plot of Sangra, although still shrouded in mystery, promises a narrative with a macabre atmosphere, in which the investigation and discovery of the truth about the corrupted environment are as important as the combats. This appreciation of the story and the setting is something that those who enjoy the style of RE4 will recognize and love, as it reinforces the emotional involvement and intellectual challenge of the player. In combat, the game maintains that classic tension of survival horror. The enemies are threatening, and the feeling of constant vulnerability makes each encounter worthwhile. The focus is not only on killing, but on surviving, which means thinking strategically about when to confront or avoid danger. The management of inventory and limited resources is very reminiscent of what was brilliantly done in RE4, bringing an agile and satisfying challenge. Sangra is definitely a recommendation for those who want to relive the classic experience of Resident Evil 4 with a national and modern touch. It is a game that respects the tradition of the genre, but also delivers novelty and challenge to keep the player interested and scared from beginning to end. If you enjoy survival horror with a tense atmosphere, intelligent puzzles, and that taste of nostalgia, Sangra is a perfect bet for your next adventure. DreadOut 3 is the highly anticipated sequel to the Indonesian survival horror franchise that brings an intriguing mix of adventure, terror, and Asian folklore. The game puts you in the shoes of Linda, a young woman who needs to face evil spirits and supernatural forces that threaten to unbalance the world between light and darkness. As in Resident Evil 4, it brings that feeling of constant tension when exploring scary environments, but with a big difference in the focus on urban legends and horror based on local cultures, which brings a freshness for fans of the genre. The game's environment is rich in atmosphere, with rural Indonesian settings that transition between day and night, where you need to survive not only direct attacks, but also the spiritual torment that slowly consumes your soul. The gameplay mixes third-person and first-person views, giving the player freedom to vary the perspective when facing the horrors that hide in the darkness, or to delve into the mysteries that the game presents. This alternation is somewhat reminiscent of the tactical flexibility that Resident Evil 4 proposed by expanding camera and combat options. DreadOut 3 is not just about shooting and fighting. It requires a lot of patience and reasoning, especially to solve the puzzles involving the spiritual world, and to interact with the ghosts and local legends that appear along the way. Each step can reveal a new threat or a mystery to unravel, which will make you think twice before advancing, referring to the balance between action and puzzle that RE4 fans recognize and love. In addition, the use of the protagonist's smartphone as a tool to access information and the Ghostpedia is an interesting modern touch. The story seems to delve into the cultural roots of Indonesia, bringing a plot that not only terrifies but also fascinates, showing the struggle between the world of the living and the spirits. This narrative layer adds emotional weight, making each encounter and each discovery important for the development of the protagonist and for the immersion of the player. The mix of supernatural elements with everyday survival creates a unique and profound journey, a differentiated experience for those who enjoy horror with soul. Visually, DreadOut 3 raises its standard with improved graphics and realistic light and shadow effects that increase the atmosphere of horror. The design of the rural environments and spiritual manifestations has been carefully crafted to create a constant sense of unease and immersion, something that is so important in horror games like Resident Evil 4, as it helps to hold the player in the tension of the world presented. For those who loved Resident Evil 4 and are looking for something that maintains the essence of survival horror with that climate of danger and mystery, but that still brings a cultural identity and innovative mechanics. DreadOut 3 is a title to keep an eye on. The promise of an intense experience combining action, puzzles, and a story full of urban legends makes it a strong bet for the horror scene in 2026. Crisol Theater of Idols is a first-person survival horror that throws you into a distorted Spain called Hispania, more precisely on the cursed island of Tormentosa. The gameplay promises to be intense and different. You control Gabriel, a soldier who uses his own blood as a weapon and vital resource. That is, every shot you take drains your life, which brings a tense and strategic dynamic of balance between attack and survival. This mechanic transforms combat into a desperate choice, and fans of Resident Evil 4 will recognize that climate of constant risk at every moment. The setting is richly detailed with grandiose ruins, disturbing statues, and a dark religious environment that contrasts decadent beauty with grotesque rituals and Catholic symbolism. The immersive and disturbing atmosphere provokes a sense of total vulnerability, as every sound, shadow, or breath accompanies the almost palpable tension, reinforcing the feeling of being surrounded by supernatural and hostile human forces. The setting suggests a mixture of psychological horror and artistic gore, which will please players who like aesthetic and thematic horror. Inspired by historical folklore and the mythology of Spain, Crisol elevates the genre by mixing elements of action, exploration, and puzzles in a plot loaded with guilt, sacrifice, and faith. The game brings to light a universe where the sacred and the profane collide violently, requiring the player to take a cautious and strategic approach to survive. In addition, its narrative exposes deep layers of cult and secrets to be discovered, awakening that curiosity and fear typical of the best horror games. The combat mechanic is different from the conventional. Using your blood as ammunition creates a system where each attack compromises your health, forcing you to think about each step and each shot. This mechanic brings a constant tension to the game, where making a mistake or attacking without thinking can quickly lead to death, reinforcing the essence of survival horror that made Resident Evil 4 so remarkable. The game also promises upgrades and customizations, increasing the damage and durability of your powers as you explore the macabre world of Tormentosa. Crisol Theater of Idols impresses with detailed graphics that contrast the gothic beauty of Spanish architecture with grotesque horrors and sinister creatures, creating a visually impactful and frightening setting. The light and shadow effects, along with the artistic design that refers to religious works and living statues, increase the feeling of being in a cursed place full of secrets. This care in the visual helps to build an engaging experience that is, at the same time, artistic and agonizing, something that fans of the modern classic horror style will love. If you are a fan of Resident Evil 4 and are looking for a game that combines action, psychological horror, and a dense narrative set in a historical and supernatural setting, Crisol Theater of Idols is a very interesting bet for 2026. It has everything to please those who like constant tension, unique challenges in combat, and an atmosphere that engages from beginning to end, offering a new and at the same time familiar experience in the universe of survival horror.
It is done.